Hello, everybody, and welcome to Measured, an episode of the Women's Health Line podcast, where we talk about women's health issues across the spectrum. And of course, today we have Dr. Julinda Lee, and I would like to ask you a couple of questions about a thing that you did recently, quite amazing, if I might say, in New Zealand. Would you like to tell us about it?
Well, this is essentially the Routeburn Classic. It is a trail run, although it might be more rock climbing. And it was a 32-kilometer run or race in the South Islands of New Zealand. It was a trail that took us across, two mountains. So you kind of run up one and run down the other. And it was amazing. Hard, but amazing.
Right. And what made you choose the Routeburn Classic? It sounds incredible. I mean, I was there, obviously, but, and I saw all these people streaming in with gashes and cuts and blood streaming from various parts of their body. And I was just thinking, my God, this is intense. But what made you choose it? I mean, why the Routeburn Classic?
I would have to blame it on some kind of algorithm on the internet. I was actually looking to do some trail runs, possibly just getting back to running in nature and I guess more uneven runs rather than running on roads and pavements because my joints were giving all some issues. And then, I was looking at possibly doing them kind of, out of country because it's always a reason for travel, a holiday. And then, I haven't been to New Zealand. So when I was looking up trails in New Zealand, this event popped up and I thought, that looks pretty all right. It's 32 clicks, not too bad. It's shorter than a marathon, and I thought, why don't I just kind of hop in? And I had just finished more of a, intellectual challenge. And I wanted to do something else that I figured guys might eat as much, and that,
I will come back to that, and I'll be
focus on my body a little bit.
Okay, so we'll come back to the intellectual challenge later in the episode. So, yes, it sounds terribly intense. And there's a picture I'm going to show you of the trail. Okay, and here's what Dr. Lee thought it was going to look like.
Yeah, I thought, it was going to be something that was quite similar to Routeburn Reservoir. So if you look up, trails, they typically grade trails in terms of difficulty. So, of course, the Routeburn Classic had warned people that, it was a technical trail. It requires training. It was a difficult trail. And Routeburn Reservoir seems to claim the same, that it is a difficult trail. It doesn't say it's technical, though, but it was completely different. So I went there thinking that it might be gravel, some rocks recently, but it really was not what I was expecting.
So on that note, I guess an important question to ask is, what kind of preparation did you undertake to run this 32 kilometers with an ascent of what? It was about 380 meters, yeah. So, prior to undertaking this, I was mostly doing more heavy lifting in the gym, a couple of, runs a week. And I want to preface this by saying that, I don't have the best knees on record. So I found that when I started to, try to run, my body was giving me quite a lot of issues. So I started with a little bit of, a posterior tibial tendonitis in my right foot, so that was giving me pain. So I figured I needed to change my training. So the training basically involves letting go of the very heavy lifting, a lot more balance work, core work, and then obviously building up cardiovascular fitness because,
The plan was to run 32 kilometers.
Right.
I haven't run any close to that in a long time.
And just coming back to that, right? I mean, we commonly hear, especially women, especially as we age, as we hit into menopause, perimenopause, they're like, oh, but running is just terrible for my knees. And then how do you sort of justify you going, and you preface this by saying you have bad knees and bad ankles and bad whatever, right? How do you justify going into a trail run, which is like up and down, uneven ground, is surely not great for your knees?
Actually, during training, what I did find was running on the trails were less painful for my knees. And I think it is, one, you're probably going at a slower rate. There is a lot more like ups and downs that require you to engage your core. It's not like running on flat ground where you tend not to engage your core that much. And there might be a lot more pounding on like hard pavements. So funnily, running, say 7 kilometers on the road was more painful than running 25 kilometers on trail.
Right.
On my joints, that is. I mean, cardiovascularly, of course, the trail at the long run was more challenging, but on my joints, it was surprisingly less as me.
Okay. So if I may just summarize, you did lots of balance work, single leg work, right? How about like proprioception? Can you talk us a little bit through that kind of training? Because I think very often as achievers or overachievers, maybe even like me, an underachiever, we really talk about training in terms of numbers. It's like, oh, I want to run 5K in 30 minutes or whatever, as opposed to training so that you be less injury prone and also be stronger. And sometimes these things are not measurable.
Yeah. I think one of the hard things for me was when I went back to doing my like single leg and balance work, I was like, oh my God, I'm really like off balance. And this is in contrast to the fact that I was able to like lift a lot. I was kind of like able to do my runs at a pretty good pace, but when it came to kind of like balance and proprioception, it was like totally off. So it took me almost 4 to 5 months to actually have some semblance of like balancing. So I think that's the amazing thing about the body is that I guess use it or lose it. So because I wasn't doing any of the balance training, I had lost it.
Right.
And then, but as soon as I got back to it, it took me longer than when I was younger, of course. But, I still got back there eventually.
Okay. And I think we'll need to do a separate episode on this because it's so much, work and I think it's interesting for me personally because I actually do quite a lot of that rehab work. And that's not necessarily reflected in like, oh, I benched 100 kilograms, but I'm pain-free. So I think we need to talk about that, but in a separate episode. So another thing that came out that fascinated me was that fueling for performance is really different for fueling for health. And I think Routeburn is an example of that because as you run in, 25 kilometers, even in McRitchie and in the heat, in the humidity, what do you have to do that's very different, and how we need to understand there is a difference between fueling for performance and fueling for health?
Yeah, I think one of the things about fueling for performance really is that the intensity of the exercise requires that you have a lot more kind of, easy access fuel, which means more carbohydrates and less fat fueling. So if it is intense and long, like with an endurance type event, then you are likely to require kind of like simple sugar fueling, which we typically ask people to avoid as part of being healthy, because too much sugars in your system means that you get a lot more sticking your sugars to your protein, so what we call like glycation, and that accelerates kind of tissue aging. So we have to be cognizant of the fact that, performance training is not necessarily good for health. And this is not to mention, the amount of stress that it puts in your body. So I think during the last few months of training, I really had to be careful. So, I was always wearing a mask because I had to interact with many people, and I didn't want to fall sick because I know that with intense training, my immunity is going to be lower. And if I felt sick, then obviously my training ritual would kind of like fall off its intended track.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I think this leads me to not final question, but the question is like, why would you put yourself through this? Why at, your age, whatever that may be, 50 plus, is that why would you put your body through that? Why not do something else? Why do this race?
Yeah. I mean, I think, it is easy for me to just kind of like continue with, the same training and the same routine. But obviously it is hard to do something that is different. And I believe that it challenges both your body and your brain in a different way. So obviously in the course of training, there were many times where I would like question myself and say, oh yeah, maybe I shouldn't do it. I should kind of like cede to like my bad knees and not do this training. But there is also like a part of my brain that will be like, oh, you wuss, don't kind of like quit, keep doing it. And I think that's like a very important part of life. Kind of, challenging yourself with hard things. And then, kind of like overcome all of, potentially like the negative self-talk, limitations that, society might place on your age. And, maybe my colleagues might disagree with me doing something like that in the context of, my bad needs. But I think what I've always felt about doing something hard and then, achieving it really is, I guess, the satisfaction of having done it. And then also, I guess, the realization that, my body can always come through. Of course, there were, points in the race that I really had to tell myself, just go slowly, just complete it. Don't fall on your face. Don't break something in the trail. So there are definitely, there's the importance of, understanding your limitations. But at the same time, I think, it's always good to kind of like push your body and your mind to its limits a little bit, because that's the only way that, your body or your mind is going to change to become strong
and to stay sharp, right? Yes, it's the use it or lose it. So I want to come back to that, because I think an important part of this race was that you had to cover 12 kilometers in 2.5 hours, right? And if you didn't reach that cutoff point in time, you would have to walk the 12 kilometers back, the walk of shame, by yourself. So what was going through your mind as you were doing that 12 kilometers up the hills and all that?
I think a lot of it initially was like disbelief. I was like, wow, this is what I'm signed up to do. And, it was also interesting because I think, the people around you kind of like made it like, made you go. But there were also people who were like, what? I'm not like running that. And you look at it and like, yeah, I agree. I'm not running that. I'm just gonna like try to make my way up this trail. But there's also the kind of like the mental calculations that, had gone through my mind. I was like, oh, okay, 12 kilometers in 2.5 hours means I shouldn't take, more than 12.5 minutes per kilometer. So with my Garmin watch, after every kilometer, it will tell me kind of like how long I took. There was if I've made it within the 12.5, it's like, oh no, this has taken me like 13 minutes. And then, kind of racing to that point. But I think, a trail run is kind of like more friendly. Everybody's kind of like taking, everybody on, saving each other from falling off the cliff sometimes, in tests. It really is, I think at that point, more a mental challenge because cardiovascular, I was fit for it, but I didn't have like the technical skills. So, the lack of confidence at that point, but still telling yourself like,
You said,
can do it.
and you said you could not even listen to music because you had to use your entire brain, like your brain faculties.
Exactly.
Braining faculties to figure out how am I going to get down this.
So it's like, okay, how do I get like from this point to this point? Part of it obviously was like imitation. So you see like the person in front of you, okay, they use this rock and this rock. So, you try to kind of like do that. But yeah, obviously many of the participants were, a lot more familiar with, this kind of a trail. And, for me, it really was a little bit, I think at that point I was like, oh my God, I've definitely bitten on more than I can chew. And but it's also amazing to then just tell yourself, okay, you just stay the course. And once you met that time limit, then you could like, oh, shoot, then take your time to really enjoy the scenery and, just take it a step at a time. And I think that's how it is for most things in life. Just kind of go in the best prepared that you can be. Life will throw you things that obviously you're not prepared for. But in the course of learning to do things, you kind of like tell yourself, oh yeah, I've done this before, and I felt like worse before, and then you just do it. Sometimes it's slower than 70-year-old people on the trail, but I think it's just being kind to yourself.
For a bit of context here, I have to jump in and say that Robert, who was running with you, Robert, if you ever watch this, shout out from Singapore, who is an older gentleman, finished ahead of Julinda, and but he fell down and actually cut his face. In the process.
It's facial injuries, a bandage on his under his left knee, which I assume was like a gash from falling on the rocks.
And he finished. I mean, kudos to him. I was just so impressed by all the people, all the participants of Routeburn, even those that did not finish, who DNF. I mean, just getting there and doing the 12 kilometers was amazing. I mean, so on that note, I want to ask, what's your next challenge, whether it be intellectual or physical? And maybe if you don't have the answer to that, we'll come back to it another time.
I mean, I don't have any like sexy goals at the moment, but I think one of the things that, I kind of like discovered through the course of training and through the course of the race was that, I was still not great on the stability front. There is just more work to do in terms of like building my foundation. And I think sometimes it's easy to get carried away with sexy goals. So
with none of us.
Because of the fact that, if I'm training for the Routeburn Classic, I have this amount of, distance that I need to cover. So you kind of then put certain other things that are not that great on the back burner, but then, we have to come back to it. And so coming back to, foot stability, foot strength, and certain things that I know that, were not that optimal going into the race. So it's just making myself go back into that.
Right.
And then, I can think about the next thing.
And at this point, I will link, there'll be a link to show in the show notes to Gate Happens, which has amazing content. So you guys should check them out. Dr. Courtney and her team have amazing information on how to build foot strength, and a lot of problems we have in our knees are actually up or down the chain, the posterior chain.
Yeah, I think like body aches, which many women suffer from, is really related to your an imbalance in the muscles in your foot. Yeah. So as your feet are kind of what keeps you upright.
Yeah.
So poor feet strength would eventually lead to a higher risk for falls later on in life. So I think as much as we often don't look at the feet and we keep them in shoes, they are kind of an important thing to look.
Okay, so we'll end here and join us for the next episode where I don't know what we will talk about, but definitely thank you for sharing your Routeburn experience. And for those of you who are interested in participating in the Routeburn Classic, the information is right here, and check it out. Good luck.